All right, which is the last part. Let me introduce Kevin Funk, who will tell us about FAR Part 40. And then, as always, Monica, we're going to welcome you back to tell us about the corresponding FAR Companion and Practitioner album. Kevin, all you.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Funk, and I am the Cybersecurity and Technology Senior Analyst within the Office of Government-Wide Acquisition Policy here at GSA. I'm going to walk through some of the changes implemented in FAR Part 40, which is titled Information Security and Supply Chain Security. Part 40 covers security-related topics. Usually, when addressing some national security issues, there can be a trade-off between improving national security and potentially increasing costs or burden. However, with this Part 40 update, there was a great opportunity to both significantly increase national security while decreasing costs and burden. These types of win-win situations present fantastic opportunities. Part 40 consolidates information found in multiple FAR parts to create a single do not buy list and provides a consolidated location to cover requirements for supply chain risk information and safeguarding information. Consolidating and standardizing these requirements enhances our national security while reducing burden on our contractors and acquisition workforce. Part 40 has been reorganized into three key subparts. The first is subpart 40.1, titled Processing Supply Chain Risk Information. This was previously reserved. This subpart provides guidance regarding when executive agencies must share relevant supply chain risk information with the Federal Acquisition Security Council. The second is subpart 40.2, Security Prohibitions and Exclusions. The do not buy list is covered in this subpart and includes 8 different prohibitions, such as certain unmanned aircraft systems, telecommunications, and video surveillance. Last is subpart 40.3, Safeguarding Information, which was also previously reserved. This subpart covers requirements for classified information and federal contract information. Overall, this consolidated part will facilitate efficient integration of new national security prohibitions in the future, such as the prohibition on certain semiconductors mandated by the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act. We have streamlined FAR Part 40 by removing redundancies and improving clarity on the security requirements while providing additional guidance in the FAR Companion. Additionally, we have consolidated and moved several regulatory requirements previously found at FAR subparts 4.4, 4.19 through 4.23, and 25.7. 14 separate provisions and clauses have been merged into 4 total, with just 4 provisions and 3 clauses. That's a significant burden reduction, going from 14 provisions and clauses to just 4. We are able to make such revolutionary changes because we standardize the prohibition requirements where feasible. Prior to this new part, some of the prohibitions did not have a reasonable inquiry standard that clarified what level of effort is required to determine if there are any prohibited products or services. Also, the prohibitions that had reasonable inquiry standards used slightly different language between the prohibitions. This created more uncertainty for offerors and contractors while adding liability risk for industry. With this new Part 40, there is now just one reasonable inquiry standard across the prohibitions that clarifies that an offeror or contractor does not need to conduct an internal or third-party audit. We also standardized the reporting timeframes for the prohibitions and ensured the reporting timeframe allows offerors and contractors sufficient time to gather and validate the necessary information. For example, one report was previously required within 24 hours. Under the new FAR Part 40, the standardized reporting timeframe for security prohibitions is now 72 hours. We also standardized the reporting elements for each prohibition to facilitate efficient and accurate reporting. Having the same report elements will allow offerors and contractors to focus on responding to any security event while spending less time navigating the reporting requirements. Overall, this updated Part 40 will produce significant national security benefits while reducing burden on the acquisition workforce and contractors by improving implementation of the security requirements through simplified and consolidated guidance, standardized requirements, and standardized reporting. I will now turn it over to Monica to discuss the practitioner resources for Part 40.
Thank you, Kevin. So in the FAR Companion for Part 40, there's an emphasis on integrating security throughout the acquisition lifecycle. And so when acquiring products and services, managing that information security and supply chain security shouldn't be an afterthought. And we don't want that to be an afterthought for the practitioners. And so the FAR Companion provides some best practices to consider for acquisitions involving sensitive information or at a higher risk of violating security exclusion or prohibition. And so there's also a listing of potential user roles in the FAR Companion, encouraging the practitioner to consider a cross-functional acquisition team, right? Remember, these are discretionary best practices. It also provides some practices for post-award as well, so an emphasis on the entire acquisition lifecycle. You'll see that in that FAR Companion for FAR Part 40. And as we segue into the practitioner album for FAR Part 40, there was one Smart Accelerator and 6 resources along with the previous Smart Accelerators and PTAI resources. And so the practitioner album, this provided ways to implement what was in the FAR Companion. So integrating that information security and supply chain security throughout the acquisition lifecycle from pre-award to post-award, and encouraging practitioners to consider ways to mitigate risks are identified and encourage it to be done early in the acquisition process. The practitioner album also shared previous Smart Accelerators and previous FAR parts like FAR Part 10, Market Research, Part 11, Describing Agency Needs, and FAR Part 39, that Acquisition of Information and Communication Technology. And so another thing that you see in the practitioner album, conducting market research appropriate to the circumstance. And so engaging with industry to gather the latest information on vendor security practices and explore if those practices can work well within your environment. So really putting thoughtful consideration into that practice and making it work for the practitioner. Another was developing language that requires offers to demonstrate information security and supply chain risk mitigation capabilities and identify ways for continuous monitoring of collaborative building of requirements, another previous Smart Accelerator. Another resource was sharing the draft requirements with industry, really encouraging that use of that practice. And a lot of these Smart Accelerators that have shared throughout the FAR parts that have kind of discussed today can be used across many FAR parts. And so the practitioner album also shared resources such as another video on how GSA can help cybersecurity, supply chain risk management, and resources and guides available on the National Counterintelligence and Security Center website. So these are non-regulatory tools for the practitioner, but flexibility and empowerment, not a one-size-fits-all approach. So in closing, this is the last time you'll see me today, but with yesterday's release of the FAR Companion, hot off the press, we really are seeking feedback and want to know how we can improve from the collective community, right? And so the FAR Companion, it will evolve. And it has those best practices in, but if something is beyond, that practitioner can assume that they can try that, right? But take smart risk taking. And so as it evolves, it's intended to share the foundation of discretionary best practices that complements the FAR. Novel approaches and innovative applications that comply with the FAR, even if not specifically referenced in the FAR Companion, are permissible and encouraged. So OFPP will work with agencies to reduce the level of agency level guidance and tools that duplicate coverage in the FAR Companion. And the FAR Companion will continue to work in concert with the FAR Council Agency Supplements and the Category Management Buying Guide, which will highlight sector-specific buying tips for navigating government-wide contracts as the foundation for the new Strategic Acquisition Guidance Framework. So these resources, along with the practitioner albums, continued investment in our workforce development, coaching support, those collaborative learning experience, and the technology-enabled tools will really ease the transition from that rigid compliance to judgment-based procurement practices and enable mission success through more timely, less costly, and more competitive buying that modern federal acquisition demands. So, Michael, I'll turn it back over to you. I think this is the final time I may turn it back over to you. I think we have some Q&A. So, Michael.
All right, Monica, Kevin, thank you very much. I do have a couple questions for each of you. Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Kevin, why do the updated provision and clause for the prohibitions in subpart 40.2 use 72 hours as the reporting timeframe?
72 hours is meant to balance the need for the government to be informed relatively quickly regarding any report involving such national security related prohibitions, while also providing offerers and contractors sufficient time to investigate and gather the necessary information. This 72-hour time frame also matches the time frame used by other federal security regulations outside of the FAR. So using 72 hours provides the opportunity to have harmonization with these other non-FAR security regulations.
Thank you, Kevin. Monica, what do you feel is the key takeaway of the Part 40 FAR Companion?
Yeah, so I'll say that, bottom line up front is that it's a best practice building security into the process from the beginning, right? Not an afterthought. And so it was amplified in the FAR Companion section 40.1. And so integrate that security acquisition into the acquisition lifecycle, where the importance of that cross-functional team is highlighted with those real user roles to consider. And so you'll also see similar language covered in FAR Part 12 Companion at 13.201B and 12.402D, 12.201. And so also that contents of a brief explanation as well. And so feedback, I want to say that feedback loop, that cycle on additional critical considerations in the realm of best practice are really welcomed and encouraged. So again, I say share your thoughts, your feedback on link on the FAR Overhaul website, where you can find there's a place to add the feedback right underneath that FAR Companion link. So that was, I'd say, is one of the takeaways there. Is that?
Thanks, Monica. All right, Kevin. It's been exciting to see Part 40 come to life here through the FAR rewrite. I know that was a long-standing goal of the FAR Council. It created empty a couple years ago, and then now it's got some stuff in it. It's wonderful. But it does create a little bit of confusion because now Part 39 is information and communication technology, but Part 40 was this previously empty part that now has some stuff in it about prohibitions. Can you explain what's the relationship now between the new Part 39 and Part 40?
So Part 40 is not specific to any type of product or service being purchased, and that's the key difference. The prohibitions and information security requirements can apply regardless of whether that procurement involves information and communication technology, whereas Part 39 is limited to procurements for information and communication technology.
That makes a lot of sense, Kevin. Thank you very much. All right, Monica, I've got one more question for you. And because this is indeed the last time you'll be on, feel free to also wrap up anything you'd like to about all of these non-regulatory resources, the FAR Companion, the forthcoming, possibly in development, the Category Management Buying Guide, practitioner albums. So anything you'd like to say about that as well. But my actual question to you is, what do you feel is the key takeaway of the Part 40 Smart Accelerators?
Yeah, so I think one of the key takeaways of the smart accelerators for FAR Part 40 is really the what, the how, the why. It's very important to integrate that security and supply chain security throughout the acquisition lifecycle. So it gave real ways for the practitioner to consider, and also real resources. So that key takeaway is really just having that available, and it's amplified in the FAR Companion. So hopefully you see that tie of what is in the smart accelerators content from the actual FAR Companion. And so if I had to wrap it up, I'll say it again, the importance of feedback, the importance of engagement, and we really want to hear your feedback on the FAR Companion. Hot off the press, posted yesterday on acquisition.gov. And so this really is we don't want to operate in a silo. And so the practitioner album, the FAR Companion, those regulatory resources and non-regulatory resources, as they continue to evolve and as the coaching support and et cetera is provided, we really want to continue being partners with you. Are our industry, you are our partners. And so we look forward to your feedback and welcome it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's exciting to have all these new resources out there to help guide us as we are transitioning to new versions of the FAR. So we talked about FAR Part 4. We talked about FAR Part 8, including briefly mentioning Parts 38 and 51, which are now empty. We talked about FAR Part 12. We talked about 40. And now, folks, what you've all been waiting for, GSA Senior Procurement Executive, Jeff Kosis.
Michael, thank you so much. I want to say hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. As Michael said, I'm Jeff Kosis, the Senior Procurement Executive for GSA, and in that role, I'm a voting member of the FAR Council. Today, you just heard GSA's second industry webinar discussing the FAR rewrite, mid-flight. You had the chance today to meet many members of the team, including Michael Thompson, today's moderator, our program manager. Michael's helping us manage all the moving pieces of this effort and trying to keep me organized. You heard from Monica Taylor several times. Monica is one of our all-star detailees to the practitioner workstream. Over the last hour and a half, the team shared a lot of information with you, and I want to thank them for all their great work. They're an amazing and a dedicated group, committed not just to the FAR rewrite, but to listening and engaging, to ensuring that both the workforce and our industry partners understand the changes and committed to delivering better acquisition outcomes. They're outstanding. I'm so fortunate to work with so many first-class professionals. Today, I plan to cover 5 key topic areas. 1, feedback. From the beginning, we've emphasized, even though we're not able to post responses publicly, your feedback's important. I'm going to talk about some of the feedback we received on the early parts, what's been most helpful, and how we've made changes to incorporate some of it. The largest area of feedback is my topic area number 2, concerns about small business. I'll talk about some of what we're hearing, add a bit of context, and I'm going to point to some of the changes that should benefit small businesses. To dispel any suspense, we're working with SBA on FAR Part 19, so no, there's no update today on Part 19. 3, I'm going to talk about the acquisition workforce and about industry readiness. The deviations are moving so quickly, and there's just a massive amount of change in motion. You heard a lot about what we're doing in this realm to help our workforce industry get ready from Monica Taylor, and I'm going to elaborate on that topic. 4, going forward, there's going to be a need to update some of the deviations that we've already issued. Linnell Walcott already covered one example. She talked about a correction on the initial model deviation to FAR Part 8. Linnell showed you how to recognize updates. There will be more, and I'll explain. Finally, I'm going to talk about next steps, some of the things you should expect as we move forward. So let's start with some of your feedback. Each time we post a model deviation, we're opening a link. You'll find that right next to the model deviation text. And we're inviting you to submit your feedback. Again, it's an open text box. It's an open text box, and it's available to you for 45 days. The feedback period for the 6 parts that we discussed today ends October 14th. At the end of each period, Maria Swaby, GSA's Procurement Ombudsman, prepares an executive summary of the comments. She also reports the number of comments received, the number that were relevant, the key themes, and any recommendations made. While we've noted that the FAR Council is not going to stop and formally reconcile the feedback that we receive, I read both the executive summary and the raw comments, and I share both with my colleagues on the FAR Council and with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. I also share the executive summary with GSA's political leadership. Now, I recognize in asking you for feedback on a part-by-part basis, we're giving you an incredibly difficult task. At this stage, the FAR rewrite may look something like a 5,000 pieces that came from a giant jigsaw puzzle, but one where some evil genius had hid the box top. As the pieces start to fit together, you start getting a sense of the picture. But maybe you're not sure. Do I see an ice cream cone or do I see a decoration on a sweater? So yes, we understand. It's hard to give feedback when the total picture isn't yet clear. To try and help the community, we introduced the practitioner albums. Based on your early feedback to the initial FAR parts, we learned we need to be more thorough in telling you if a text is being removed entirely, if it's being moved to a new home in the FAR, or if it's being moved to non-regulatory strategic acquisition guidance. The feedback period has ended on several of the early deviations, and there's been a good bit of commonality in what we've heard. One of the recurring themes is all about reference errors, about misaligned citations. Now, we know the FAR is so interconnected. And right now, we have 3 agencies that are busy making changes at a great pace. So we knew there'd be a risk of errors of this sort. And candidly, we risk more errors of this sort throughout the deviation phase. Thank you. We appreciate each time somebody points one of these out. It is super helpful. They will be cleaned up, maybe in supplemental deviations, or maybe during the upcoming rulemaking process. Another key theme, restoring deleted text. There have been a lot of comments asking us to restore content that has been deleted. We're looking at that. We're particularly looking at the rationale provided. Why are you telling us to put the text back? In my mind, many of the items that we're being asked to restore are directing the contracting officers on the specific ways to do the work, the hows of the job, in other words. We've not been deleting things that tell our folks what they need to do or why they need to do it. We have been deleting things that tell them how to do the job. Now, you may recall all the way back in Deviation Part 1, we dealt with the guiding principles. And one of the key objectives was to empower the acquisition team. Well, we don't want to tell them how to do something, except where such instructions are absolutely essential. We're reluctant to spend a lot of page real estate on the hows because it limits the contracting officer flexibility. When we lock process work in regulation, it makes it very hard and very time-consuming to ever change it. There's no way we could ever keep up with the pace of change in our society. We're at the dawn of the AI revolution, and we know we may practice acquisition quite differently in years to come. So that's why we're considering the recommendation to put things back, but when they're how to do something language, we're pretty hesitant. For the most part, we think those discretionary practices, the how to do things, those really belong in the non-regulatory side, in the strategic acquisition guidance. I'm going to elaborate on Monica's comments here. As the name implies, this is guidance. It is non-regulatory. It's not mandatory. It's not required. Contracting officers are not held to it. Guidance, best practices, highlights, suggestions. There's been a ton of guidance for acquisition teams, and over the years, it's been scattered in a great many locations. When it's hard to find, it's hard to use. One part of what the practitioner team has been doing is pulling that guidance together They're giving it a single home. They're making it easy to find. Then they're supplementing it where needed so that it aligns with the FAR changes. We're organizing that strategic acquisition guidance into three major groupings, just because you need a category system for anything of this sort. You saw the first part of this group, the practitioner albums, almost from the beginning. Practitioner albums amplify both the FAR and the new FAR companion with use cases. They're deeper dives into specific techniques or approaches. As you've been hearing, yesterday released the FAR companion, the second piece. I think we keep saying yesterday because everyone still has a buzz on finally getting that one out and on the street. The companion's a support book. It's a set of problem-solving ideas. It's designed to work in concert with the FAR. The companion highlights discretionary practices all across the acquisition system. The comments and the commentary are designed to assist the working contract specialist or contracting officer to better understand the FAR, to better grasp the related procurement principles. This is the way that we're looking to scale best and good practices, while recognizing and leaving room for local adoption. The third part of the strategic acquisition guidance is the category management buying guide. This piece is still under development. We're thinking of the category guide as being sector-specific buying tips, and as such, it's going to be most helpful when you're navigating government-wide contracts. That's why Monica referred to it as the government-wide category management solution finder. So yes, we're considering recommendations on language to restore. And we want to be clear, a good bit of the deleted language is not gone. It's being rehoused. It's being moved to different types of strategic guidance. Or, if you like my puzzle analogy, you now know the ice cream was indeed a decoration on a sweater. It was not an afternoon snack. Returning to the feedback, the biggest area to date has been on small business issues. When I say biggest to date, it's been a consistent feedback point. We heard it on part 1. We heard it on part 6. We heard it on part 10. We heard it on part 11. We heard it on part 18. And we heard it on part 39. What is it? We heard there's the potential for negative impact on small businesses. For example, we received comments on part 10 that raised concerns that removing consolidation and bundling language would remove the small business safety net. In part 11, commenters suggested removing the explicit requirement to consider the capability of small businesses would harm the small businesses. We appreciate the feedback, and I want to assure you, we are very much aware of small business concerns. The executive order, which directed the FAR rewrite, said, since its inception, the FAR has swelled to more than 2,000 pages of regulations. One of the causes of 2,000 plus pages of regulations is saying the same thing over and over again. Throughout the rewrite, we've been reducing duplication. To me, it's more important to state a requirement clearly in its proper home rather than saying it in thick prose in 10 separate locations. Today, we did not focus on acquisition planning on FAR Part 7, but I want to refer to that deviation it posted just last week because it's relevant to some of the small business feedback. It also fits my puzzle analogy. The Part 7 deviation emphasizes acquisition planning should be a living process, an ongoing process. It highlights early engagement, a step that's absolutely critical to ensuring small businesses receive opportunities. Part 7 now includes requirements that were previously found in FAR Part 10 to ensure that small business concerns are appropriately considered. Pre-deviation, FAR Part 7 had 3 different business processes to address a situation where an agency was considering combining contracts in a way that could impact a small business. It defined a separate process for bundling, for substantial bundling, and for consolidation. With the deviation, the business process is unified into a single one. It features elevated approvals and increased visibility. So with the FAR 7 puzzle pieces in place, you can now see more of that picture. You now know there's at least 3 sweaters. Only one has an ice cream cone. Maybe one has cupcakes and one candy canes. With the new FAR Part 7, I think that the concerns over language previously deleted from Part 10 should be at least slightly lessened. Turning back to the deviations we focused on today, the FAR Council commitment to small business showed up in FAR Part 12. As you heard from Chris, there's a 30% reduction in the provisions and clauses required in commercial contracts. Also in Part 12, the changes simplified and streamlined the evaluation. That means evaluations move faster. Long wait times for contract awards are particularly harmful to small businesses. The concern with small business needs also showed up in FAR Part 4, where the requirements for SAM registration were greatly simplified. As you heard, the systems changes will lag the deviations. But once they happen, we strongly believe these changes will benefit all of our industry partners, especially small businesses. Now, I understand many here are either eagerly or apprehensively awaiting for FAR 19 to post. For right now, all I can say is we're working very closely with SBA on this part. It's important for the FAR and the SBA rules to remain in sync. To date, GSA has issued over 30 FAR deviations. All of them are based on the model deviation text created by the FAR Council. And we did that in less than 4 months. That's a lot of change. That's a lot of things that the workforce needs to understand. That's a lot of differences the workforce needs to be ready to take on. So let's actually talk about what we're doing to ensure the workforce is ready and for all of you to ensure industry is ready. Now, if we haven't said it enough, the deviations are moving incredibly quickly, and there's so much change in motion, it's hard for anyone to stay current. While GSA's issued deviations for all the parts where model text is available, agencies are issuing their deviations at their own pace. One of the biggest considerations is ensuring the acquisition for workforce is ready to operate under those new rules. A few minutes ago, you heard from Chris Hardcastle. Chris is also leading GSA-wide training on the FAR overhaul. Chris is running 2 training sessions weekly. He repeats each one twice, thus helping ensure our workforce understands the changes. In this way, we are delivering hundreds of hours of training per week on the FAR deviations, making sure we do all we can to prepare the GSA acquisition workforce. Government-wide, the practitioner albums are the lead doorway we're using to build workforce awareness. And the good news is over 37,000 albums have been completed by acquisition workforce members across government. The Federal Acquisition Institute and the Defense Acquisition University, the 2 major acquisition training organizations, jointly host regular federal-wide office hours to help inform the acquisition workforce of the changes, to discuss the impact for practice, and to answer questions and to share experiences. We've established a common community of practice platform. It's a platform that supports both the civilian and the DoD workforce, and it's set up to help them through the changes. There are opportunities to provide information available at the time of need, because that's the best way to provide information. Have it there ready, available, have people know where to find it. It also encourages experiential sharing. Building off of the successful innovation framework really created by the Procurement Innovation Lab at Department of Homeland Security, we're providing hands-on coaching and guidance to acquisition teams as they're implementing the new FAR in practice. We're also building a government-wide applied workshop. Expect that to launch early in the new fiscal year, and it's a way to ensure our workforce has real-time tools so they can take all of these deviations from the theoretical and put them to practical use. We've not forgotten industry in all this. GSA has been working to keep industry and the public informed and involved in the overall process in several ways. One, technology. I think many of you are now familiar with the FAR overhaul webpage on acquisition.gov. I mentioned it has the submit your feedback links where you can submit feedback on each FAR part rewrite. I'm going to talk a bit about how we're using that. Notifications. Well, as soon as possible after a new FAR post is released, the Office of the Procurement Ombudsman, Maria Swaby's office, sends out a notification to subscribers. We use the .gov delivery system. If you want to be on that list, Google GSA Ombudsman and subscribe. Use the stay in touch function. If you do, you'll receive the notifications of all these changes. The acquisition.gov team also sends out a notice. They do it through our FAR news alert system. You can subscribe by going to the FAR overhaul page and sign up under Sign Up for FAR News. 3, industry association meetings. GSA has met with several industry associations. That includes COTSIA, includes the Coalition for Government Procurement, and that includes the Mid-Size Industry Association. We've talked to their members about the FAR overhaul. We've answered their questions. We've asked for feedback, and we've asked them to answer GSA questions to better understand how the FAR overhaul is impacting them. And 4, webinars. Today was GSA's second webinar on the FAR overhaul. We hosted an initial one back in May, explaining the foundational executive order that was 14275, or Restoring Common Sense to Federal Procurement. We talked about the implications, and we answered questions live. Those slides were posted on gsa.gov, and we had a huge crowd. Over 5,500 people attended. If you're on that call, thank you for coming back. The slides and the video recording from today's call will also be posted on gsa.gov. As Michael Thompson told you, we'll do so as soon as possible. Primarily, we need to run that through the 508 compliance process before we can post. We're learning from these engagements, and one of the things we've learned is we don't always get it right the first time. There will need to be updates made. So let me talk a bit about how we're going to make the updates. Clearly, rewriting the FAR via deviation has to be a dynamic process. We've already updated one model deviation. We corrected the required use language in the FAR Part 8 deviation. As we wrap this phase and start heading towards rulemaking, expect that there will be updates to some of the other deviations as well. Now, when I say an update, it means there's 2 distinct actions that have to happen. 1, the FAR Council has to update master deviation text. And 2, the individual agency, such as GSA, has to issue its own supplement to the previously issued deviation. Let me give you some examples of what's upcoming. In FAR 12 deviation, there's a clause table. We know that we're going to need to update that table with changes that have been made since the deviation posted. We thought it was more important to get the basic information out, even knowing we'd have to go back and supplement it. On October 1st, there's going to be a required update as several thresholds across the acquisition system increase. We issued a recent FAR rule to announce the threshold changes, and that means now going back through several of the RFO deviations and making updates. Several items in the feedback recommended either corrections or further deviations. And we're looking at that. It's not actually a further deviation, it'll be a supplement, but some of those may be necessary. Linnell showed you what an update would look like. You'll recognize the updated master deviation through the legend update through the date, and through use of color. However, we're still in the deviation process, and we do have to head towards rulemaking. So let's talk a bit about next steps. Going back to the executive order, we were directed to rewrite the FAR in 180 days via deviation. That's been a mammoth undertaking. Over the past few months, the FAR Council thus has been focused on this task, and we've only issued a couple of rules. Most recently, the one I just mentioned, the updates and thresholds. We need to consider your feedback. We need to make corrections. We need to evaluate some possible additional deviation that will address long-term pain points. But we also have to move forward with the backlog of normal rules, many of which have statutory deadlines. Right now, we're discussing options and timing for when we're going to formally enter the rulemaking phase. We're in those conversations with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, who is the ultimate decision maker on that question. What we're trying to do is balance the importance of testing and iterating with the need for stability found by locking things in rules. The executive order gave us 180 days. If you start your clock at April 15th, the deadline is October 12th, which is very close. We're doing all we can to meet or to beat that date. The very last deviation in this round is going to be one to Part 53, forms. As with clauses, as with terms, the forms are going to be informed by all of the other changes. So when we issue our FAR 53 deviation, you'll know we have wrapped this phase. So that concludes the key points I wanted to raise. But Michael, you said earlier that you had some questions for me.
I do, Jeff. We've received some general questions that we thought would be better for you to answer than our subject matter experts. So thank you for all that update. And this first one is not going to be a surprise because this has been a constant theme throughout, which is the impact on small business. What are the anticipated outcomes for small businesses in the FAR overhaul in general? And specifically, how will the proposed deviations for FAR Parts 6, 8, 12, and 52 impact small businesses?
Yeah, Michael, no, not a surprise. Try to talk a little bit about small business, but let me expand on that. You know, for the last decade, we've seen a decline in the industrial base. Both DoD and SBA have written reports. They've testified before Congress. There's been a lot of attention to the decline in the defense industrial base and in the federal industrial base. DoD and SBA aren't alone in those concerns. GSA shares them. We understand the importance of having a robust and a healthy industry base. By making the pathway to federal acquisition easier to enter, as you heard from James Tsujimoto when he talked about the changes to FAR Part 4, by reducing the regulatory burden, such as you heard from Kevin Funk when he talked about FAR 40 and cyber supply chain concerns. And as you heard from Chris Hardcastle when we talked about FAR 12, we expect that making the path easier, reducing regulation, is going to encourage more small businesses to participate. We're especially looking for those who can bring us cutting-edge solutions. In other words, we think that set of changes will help us to grow the industrial base. Through the changes to Part 12, and through the new scheduling ordering procedures that Stephen Carroll talked about, and through other forthcoming changes not yet released, we're working to speed up the acquisition process. We believe a faster process will help us to reduce administrative costs, costs that are especially important for small business, and will increase competition. By treating acquisition planning as a living process, what I highlighted in Part 7, we expect to create more opportunity for small business. Bottom line, Michael, we're well aware of the feedback. We understand the concerns being raised by small business. Yes, we're reducing duplication. We're migrating process work from regulations to guidance. And because we're only showing pieces of that puzzle so far, we get the concern. We remain committed to small business success through the federal acquisition system, And one of the most important metrics we're using is, are we able to grow the industrial base?
Yeah, Jeff, just how many decorations are on this sweater of this puzzle? I guess we'll find
Uh,
out soon enough.
that's right. When we have the whole picture, we can count.
Exactly. All right, Jeff, you talked about the FAR deviations a little bit earlier, but we had a lot of questions about this, so I'm trying to distill it into just a couple for you. There's some confusion about the effective dates of the FAR deviations, including whether each model deviation is immediately effective once it's published, or if the effective date depends on each agency executing its own deviation. Can you explain what's going on here?
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael. I know this can be confusing. There's a couple of things in motion. The FAR Council is posting master deviation text. Uh, that's just it. That is merely text. Each individual agency then has to implement the deviation. They implement that by issuing their own deviation. That's something that has to be signed by the agency's senior procurement executive. For GSA, I have that role, and so the deviation does not take effect until I sign it. When I sign the deviation, we also have a block where we announce the effective date. For some of our early deviations, we put them into effect immediately. But as we got close to the end of the fiscal year, we said, okay, we can't do this to our workforce or our industry partners. And we're getting to big, impactful, complicated changes. So on our more recent deviations, we said they will be effective for GSA on November 3rd. By moving them to November, we get past the end of the fiscal year. We have time to help our workforce understand the deviation, understand the guidance, understand how to use these tools. For other agencies, they have to look at their workforce to figure out the right timing. But I've not seen anybody cut the line and want to make their deviations effective earlier than GSA did.
Thanks, Jeff. And just to underscore the point there, if I understand you correctly, when an agency issues their deviation, then it's effective whenever the effective date they put for that agency's contracting activities.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Each agency senior procurement exec will sign the deviation for their agency, and they will establish an effective date.
Thank you, Jeff. Related to all of that, what is the time frame for agencies to submit, publish, sign their own deviations? For example, the FAR Council published the FAR Part 12 model deviation on August 14th, and as you mentioned, GSA has already published their deviation. But as of today, GSA is one of only 4 agencies to have done so. And then what about agencies who haven't issued any deviations at all yet?
Okay, so we've talked about the executive order several times. Typically, what will happen along with an executive order, the Office of Management and Budget will issue implementing instructions, and they did so in this case. What OMB said is agencies should generally issue their deviations that will implement the FAR Council guidance within 30 days of release of the text. They also told agencies, send a copy of the deviations to GSA. They asked agencies to do that because GSA runs acquisition.gov. As we receive the deviations, we post them. The GSA team posts them once a week, and you can go in, look at any of the deviations, and see which agency has implemented a deviation. In talking agencies that have not issued any, I think you're specifically asking me about Department of Defense, Michael. DoD was treated to their own special executive order. DoD was told not just to overhaul the FAR as part of the FAR Council, they were told to overhaul their FAR supplement, the DFAR. And so I know that they are looking, how do they fit the timing and the pieces together? As such, it's a little more complicated for DoD than for the other agencies. Now, we're all told to overhaul our deviations, but the rest of us do not have a separate executive order that adds a little more complexity in how to pull those pieces together.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, there have been a lot of questions about that specific point, so I appreciate the clarification there. Another question that we received is about multi-year contracts. How will the FAR changes impact current And I think the person asking the question means one is already awarded multi-year contracts. And will the multi-year contracts be capped at 5 or 7 years in the future?
Thanks, Michael. And I've heard a lot of variations of that question. A lot of people are asking, how does one change or another affect an ongoing contract? So in this case, actually, the FAR is really helpful. There's a subpart in the FAR. It's called FAR Conventions. If you're looking at the current FAR, you'll find that in 1.108. If you're looking at the overhaul, you'll find it in 1.107. So it did get to move. But the conventions answers this question. It explains how FAR changes apply both to existing solicitations and to existing contracts. And so normally, if there's a solicitation that is issued on or after the effective date of a change, the solicitation needs to be updated to reflect that change. If the solicitation was already issued before the change, then it's a contracting officer decision. They have discretion to amend their solicitation. They are not normally required to do so. And it's the same thing with existing contracts. The FAR convention is the contracting officer can modify the contract with appropriate consideration. They are not required to do so. So unless the agency requires a different action, it's a business judgment call for the CO. Consider the circumstances, consider all the facts on the ground, and either incorporate it into an existing contract or wait for a new contract. It kind of reinforces the guiding principle idea that we want to empower the acquisition team to make a good business decision, and we want them to have the tools and resources to do so.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a comprehensive answer, and I think really helpful for people who are confused about that. I was one of them, so thank you. I've got one more question. It's kind of a general question, so I invite you to add any concluding thoughts as well, Jeff. How does the FAR Council plan to ensure transparency, consistency, and fairness in implementing the FAR overhaul across all agencies?
So let's talk about the role of the FAR Council with that question, Michael, and the role of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. We've mentioned that office several times today. For anyone who's not familiar with it, Federal Procurement Policy is part of the Office of Management and Budget. It's part of the White House. And they're kind of the boss executive agency. They oversee all the other agencies. They're the entity that's really responsible for oversight. They issue the guidance such as generally issue your deviations within 30 days. They're the ones that track, oversee, work with agencies, ask the questions about what's going on. GSA and the other members of the FAR Council have a different role. GSA's role is to provide a lot of support, a lot of training, a lot of tools. We run the acquisition.gov site. We chair a group called the Civilian Acquisition Agency Council to help answer questions to help participate in the rulemaking process. But GSA is not an oversight agency. Neither are DoD or NASA's other members of the FAR Council. So we help the agencies, but we're not the ones who oversee what they're doing here. And since you kindly also invited me to offer some concluding thoughts, one, I want to thank the folks who hung on throughout this call. I think we threw a lot of information at people. Michael, I want to thank you for being a fantastic MC pulling this together. Monica, you had a huge role in this. We brought you on camera many times. Thank you for that, and as well as for participating in the detail and spending the last few months helping with this. And look forward to your continued help as we try and formalize all the work we're doing. And on behalf of the entire GSA team, kudos, congratulations. You are just an awesome bunch and greatly appreciate you. Michael, that's all I have.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. And so now let me begin our conclusion. For the last time, I'm going to remind everyone that the slides and the recording of this session will be posted on gsa.gov as soon as we can, though it may take a bit of time because of editing, so please be patient. The slides from the first webinar, which we held back in May, as Jeff mentioned just a moment ago, are already posted on gsa.gov, and we're planning to post the recording from the May session there as well. The link for today's content and May's is the same, and it is provided in the chat. We'll put it in there one last time. Please save this link. It will take you directly to the page on gsa.gov where the slides and the videos from both sessions will, as soon as we can, be posted. I want to echo Jeff's thanks of everyone. Thank you to our presenters, James, Linnell, Stephen, Chris, and Kevin. Special thank you to Monica for pulling quadruple duty. And of course, Jeff, thank you to you for your insight and leadership through this whole process. I also want to thank everyone behind the scenes who worked to put this webinar on, as well as everyone working on the FAR rewrite itself. Without you all, we would have nothing to talk about. And thank you again, everyone, for attending and for submitting such thoughtful questions. Without you, we would have plenty to talk about, but no one to listen. So thank you for joining. To continue your engagement, please be sure to submit your feedback to FAR Parts 4, 8, 12, and 40 on acquisition.gov by the October 14 deadline. Please submit feedback to subsequently deviated FAR Parts by their deadlines as well. And lastly, thank you. Have a great rest of the afternoon.